Roland Waters sat at the bar, sipping a rum and coke, patiently waiting for a message on his phone. As he sipped his drink, he reflected on the events that had led him to this point in his life. Born 36 years ago in Anchorage, Alaska, he married Linda, his high school sweetheart, immediately after graduation. He took a job on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and spent weeks at a time moving from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez, fixing various problems as they arose. One day, he returned home after a grueling 6 weeks on the road to find his wife in bed with two of his former classmates. After their assurances that it meant nothing and that it was just sex, he divorced her and joined the Army to get as far away from this situation as possible. He later met and married his second wife, Melissa, while stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas. He thought he had hit the jackpot, but found out otherwise when he returned from a 12-month deployment to Iraq. He found her in bed with another soldier on the base and divorced her. This marriage lasted just under 2 years, about the same length as his marriage to Linda. He threw himself into his work and became the best soldier he could be. He had one task to kill the enemy, and he got damn good at it. Following his military service, he was hired as a freelancer, working for various interests in places such as Africa and the Middle East. He also worked in Myanmar, helping ethnic minorities against a brutal regime. In short, he became a soldier of fortune, a mercenary, highly paid and in demand. His ruthlessness, efficiency, and brutality on the battlefield attracted potential clients. One of the factors that set Roland apart from other contractors was that he carefully selected his clients. For example, he refused to work for those involved in substances or human trafficking. On several occasions, he took on lower-paying assignments simply because he agreed with his benefactor's cause. Another factor that set him apart from others was his weapon. While others opted for more modern weapons, he used an old World War II Thompson submachine gun that he had purchased from a somewhat shady character who claimed the pistol had been used by another mercenary in the Congo War of the 1960s. Legend has it that Patty Hearst bought this gun after hearing about it. The person said. Roland didn't believe this statement. He was familiar with this old song. However, the weapon seemed to call to him, and it felt good in his hands. It was almost as if they were made for each other. The weapon was in excellent condition and came with 2 large magazines and a drum that held 100 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition. It only had an effective range of about 150 meters, but the trench broom, as it was called, was lethal and suited it just fine. He especially liked that it was designed to be fired from the hip. It cost him a lot of money, but it was deadly at close range and very reliable. After a decade of working as a mercenary, he grew tired of the constant fighting and returned home, hoping to leave his past behind and start a family. He became a freelance consultant for a private security company and settled down. He met his current wife, Susan, at a social event where he was hired to provide security. Susan was an attorney at the firm of Freeman and Douglas. They literally ran into each other at an event as she was heading towards the bar. He caught her when she tripped, stopping her from falling onto the hard floor. He didn't think much of it at the time, but Susan was immediately attracted to the tall, quiet, powerfully built man with a jagged scar on his face. They talked a lot that night and started dating. He was very careful not to reveal too much about his background, only telling her that he worked overseas as a contractor after serving 4 years in the military. He became very creative when she asked about the scars on his body, and he, of course, never told her about his secret foreign accounts. He'd already been burned twice and wasn't about to go through that again. They fell in love and married a year after they first met, and Roland thought he had finally found his only true soulmate. At first, everything was great for them. They enjoyed each other several times a week and had a good relationship. Of course, they had their differences, like all married couples, but they overcame them. They even discussed the possibility of having children and bought a 2-story, 3-room house in a nice suburb. Then everything started to fall apart. Susan began to spend more time in the office, working on various tasks and going to parties with the girls and other colleagues. This made Roland uneasy, but then came the summer party thrown by her company. Roland went with Susan as he always did, but he knew there was going to be trouble as soon as he entered. Susan introduced him to her colleagues as always, but then she introduced him to the firm's new attorney, Michael Van Owen. For a moment, Roland experienced déjà vu. He hoped that this was not the Van Owen he had known in Africa. But when he looked at the tall man with a chiseled face, his hopes were dashed. It was the same man, the man who had once hired him and fought him, but then defected to the enemy after receiving more money, supposedly from a federal agency. Several years have passed since then, but Roland was not a person who forgives easily, and he never forgot faces. Roland came face to face with the man who once tried to kill him. Van Owen extended his hand with a smirk on his face, but Roland simply walked past. Susan ran after him, calling out to him. "Roland, dear," she said, "what's happened? Why were you so rude to Mike?" Roland couldn't tell her the whole truth without revealing his real past. "I don't trust this man," he said. "Something about him bothers me. Sorry, I really can't explain." "Well, you'll have to live with it," she said. "Mike and I are working on several projects right now, and we'll be spending a lot of time together. Now gather yourself and join us at the table." "Are you working with him?" Roland asked. Susan nodded her head. "Yes," she said. "Come on, we need to get back to the party." Susan took his hand and led him back to their table. He held her for a moment. "I'm warning you, Susan, you need to be careful around him," he said. "Don't worry," she said. "I'll be careful. Now let's go, you're embarrassing me." He allowed her to lead him back to the table where they sat down. Van Owen sat down opposite them, watching Roland closely. Maybe, Roland thought, he was afraid that he might be exposed. Susan went to another table to talk with her colleagues. Van Owen leaned across the table and looked Roland in the eye. "I hope you understand that what happened in Africa was not personal," he said. "It was just business. But now that I know Susan is your wife, it's become personal. Know that I intend to do everything to take her from you." "I should have hunted you like a dog and killed you back in Africa," Roland said. "And I warn you, if you touch my wife, I will kill you." Van Owen laughed. "You are such a naive romantic, Roland," he said. "You've always been like this. I've already tasted your wife, and I intend to have her before your eyes before it's all over. And then I will fulfill the contract for you. I bet she doesn't know about your past, right? Who knows, maybe I'll tell her everything. But for today, I declare a truce for the sake of old times." "I warn you, Van Owen," said Roland. "This won't end well for you. Leave it. Leave Susan alone." Van Owen smiled, but his smile was not friendly. Susan returned to their table and looked at the two men. "I see you are starting to get to know each other," she said. "Yes, we understand exactly where we stand, don't we, Roland?" asked Van Owen. "Yes," Roland said in a neutral tone. Susan looked at them, wondering what was going on between these men. She also wondered if Mike told Roland about their affair. She knew that Roland would not tolerate her cheating, especially after what his previous wives had done to him. She sat down next to her husband, and the three of them ate their food, watching each other carefully. Susan felt as if the tension between them could be cut with a knife. After dinner and the obligatory speeches, Susan took Roland by the hand and dragged him to the dance floor. Roland hugged her tightly, feeling her body next to him. Usually he enjoyed her closeness, but not this time. While they danced, he watched closely Van Owen, who was also looking at them. "What's going on, Roland?" she asked quietly. "You are tense, like a compressed spring. Talk to me." "How well do you know Van Owen?" he asked. "We worked together on several projects." "Why?" she asked. "You didn't answer my question," he said. "How well do you know him?" "What do you mean?" she asked. "You know what I mean," he said. "Did you sleep with him?" She looked at him, shocked. "Of course not," she said. "How can you ask such a thing?" "Let me rephrase that," he said. "Did you have sex with him?" Her body twitched slightly at his question, giving him an answer. "I see," he said. "How long has this been going on?" "Roland, it doesn't mean anything," she said. "This means everything to me, Susan," he said. You know what I've been through, and you know how I feel about infidelity. I won't stand for this. Tell me, dear wife, what do you know about your lover? Not much, she said. Roland noticed that she did not deny the affair. He came to work for us about 6 months ago. They say he worked for a federal agency. Why do you ask? He's dangerous, Roland said, and if you want to have a future with me, you need to end your relationship with him immediately. She looked at him, trying to figure out what he was thinking. This is a threat, she asked. I don't make threats, he said. This is a warning, and you better listen. Otherwise, it will end badly. What do you mean? She asked. Just trust me, he said. This will end badly. For you, for him, and for us. You scare me, Roland, she said. You better be afraid, he said. What are you hiding from me, Roland? What's happening? In fact, she asked. I can't tell you, Roland said. You'll just have to trust me. How long has this been going on between you two? Not for long, she said, crying. Maybe a couple of months. A couple of months, Roland said. It's clear. Are you in love with him? No, she said. I love only you. You have a very strange way of showing it, he said. Sorry, she said. I never meant to offend you. It just happened. Bullshit, Roland said calmly, making her flinch. You could have said no, but you didn't. Please believe me, she said. I really love you, and I don't want to lose you. Okay, Roland said. Then it won't be difficult for you to part with him. Why don't you tell him to leave you alone, right here and now, in front of my eyes? Okay, she said, if that's what I have to do. That's true, he said. Let's tell him that right now. If that's what you want, she said nervously. They left the dance floor and headed back to the table. Van Owen stood watching them approach. My wife wants to tell you something, Van Owen, Roland said. Mike looked at Susan, who looked scared. Mike, he knows. We can't see each other anymore, she said. I am a married woman, and I want to remain so. Van Owen nodded his head. I see, he said, looking at Roland. Well, I guess the best man wins again, he added, holding out his hand. No offense, Roland looked at Mike's outstretched hand, frowning. Refusing to shake Mike's hand, he led Susan towards the exit. Are we leaving already? She asked. Yes, he said. As they approached the car, Roland surprised Susan again by inspecting the car before getting in. He even opened the trunk and hood, looking for wires or anything else unusual. After making sure that the car was not mined, he put Susan in and sat down himself. What was it? Asked Susan. You can never be too careful, he said. They drove home in silence. Roland was furious and Susan was afraid, not knowing what her husband was going to do. She hoped that her performance at the party had convinced him enough to leave her affair alone, but she still had concerns. Looking at her husband, she suddenly did not recognize him. It was like looking straight into the face of death itself. Are we fine? She asked, afraid of what he might say. It's up to you, he said. If you stay away from Van Owen, yes. In fact, I think you should quit and find another job. I can't do this, she said. I am working on very important projects now, and if I am successful, I may be made a partner in the firm. Roland looked at her. Are you saying that your job is more important than our marriage? Roland asked. No, she said. I'm just at a key point in my career, and I can't afford to screw it up now. You have already ruined our marriage. My gut tells me I should throw you out on the street, he said. And I can still do it. If I find out you're still sleeping with Van Owen, it's over. Understood? She nodded her head. Got it, she said. But you have to tell me what's going on between you two. I already said I can't reveal this, he said. I'll just say we've dealt with each other before and leave it at that, okay? Susan nodded her head, but decided to talk to Mike. Roland decided at that moment that he would try to improve his relationship with Susan, but it would be a trust but verify situation. At the first opportunity, he contacted an old friend who specialized in surveillance. Bill Matthews had trouble with the law as a child, but those who knew him said he was just an excitable guy. Bill was not as skilled with firearms as the other members of the team, but he was the best reconnaissance and surveillance specialist Roland had ever met. He was also a good planner and could assess a situation in a matter of seconds. Roland often said that he trusted Bill's guesses more than other people's so-called facts. "What? Is Van Owen alive?" asked Bill. "Are you sure about this?" "Oh, yes," said Roland, "and he slept with my wife." "That son of a bitch," Bill said. "What do you want from me? Whatever it is, I'll do it." "What I need now is surveillance, audio, video, everything," Roland said. "How much is it?" "Hey, I owe you my life more than once," Bill said. "Consider it a favor." "Thank you," Roland said. "I appreciate it, but let me at least cover your expenses." "Buy me a beer when this is over, okay?" Bill asked. Roland smiled. "Consider it a deal, my friend," he said. "So what are you going to do with them if they're still, involved?" asked Bill. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it," Roland said. It didn't take long before Roland had the proof he needed. A week after talking to Bill, he was holding a large envelope with photos and a USB drive with several high-definition videos. On Friday, he sat in the kitchen with an envelope, waiting for his wife to return. His .45 caliber pistol was also on the table. It was 6:30 p.m. when she opened the door and walked in. She walked into the kitchen and saw her husband sitting at the table with an envelope and a gun in front of him. Instinctively, she knew she was caught. "Sit down, wife," Roland said in a neutral tone. She remained standing. "I said sit down," he barked. She timidly pushed back her chair and sat down. "So you got me," she said. Roland nodded his head slowly. "Do I need to show you the photos?" he asked. "What about the video?" Her eyes opened wide. "Do you have a video?" she asked. "Yes," said Roland, "in high definition. I have to say, you should have been a star. You know what was worse than seeing you have sex with that bastard?" "No, Roland, I don't know," she said quietly. "Hearing you two talk about me disrespectfully," he said. Susan lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Stop crying," he said. "You made a promise to me, and then you broke it. How could you do this to us? Was I such a bad husband for you? Have I ever hurt you or treated you badly?" "No, you were a wonderful husband," she said. "Then why did you do it? Because of his great dignity? You're a big bitch now?" he asked. "No," she said. "I think I just fell in love with him. You're probably going to file for divorce now." "What do you think?" he asked rhetorically. She looked at him defiantly. "Know one thing," she said. "This will be the biggest mistake of your life. I know everything about you. What was your name?" "Oh yes, Roland the Merciless Thompson Gunner. How many people have you killed in your mercenary career? You know all this will come up in the divorce. I also know that you are wanted in several countries." Roland chuckled. If the stupid bitch knew this, he thought, she would also know how he usually destroyed his enemies. She had no idea what she was up against. First of all, it's an old nickname from a song from the 70s. It was headless, not ruthless. As you can see, my head is still there, and I come from Alaska, not Norway, he said. Secondly, I didn't do anything illegal, at least in the USA, and the governments of those countries have changed since then, and we do not have extradition treaties with them. "Well, maybe the IRS will be very interested in your offshore accounts," she said. "You know, the ones where all your money is hidden. I'm talking about money you didn't pay taxes on." Roland smiled again. "If you had bothered to look, you would have known that those old accounts were opened by your lover a long time ago," he said. "And they are empty now. For many years." Her face paled as he continued. "Right. Your lover was the one who first hired me into the business. Oh, he didn't tell you that, did he? I bet he also didn't tell you that he's been by my side for years. And I bet he didn't tell you about the contract to kill me." "What?" she asked. "This can't be true." "Oh, but it's true, dear wife," said Roland. "He came very close to killing me. I stopped him and almost killed him, but he escaped. I haven't seen or heard from him since until I saw him at a party. Imagine my surprise. "I don't believe you," she said. "Have you seen the scar on his inner thigh? I'm sure I saw it. I saw you looking straight at him when delivered to him pleasure," said Roland. Susan's face became even paler. "I made this scar when I shot him. By the way, did he tell you that he's going to kill me?" Susan shook her head. "No," she said. "It cannot be true." "Oh, but it's true, dear wife," said Roland. "And I know he told you this because I have it all on video. I also have your answer. Do you want to take a look?" She shook her head. "So what are you going to do? Still planning on going on your little cruise with him? You know what cruise I'm talking about, the one you two planned for this weekend, telling me you had a meeting with clients out of town." "So you know about this?" she asked. "Actually, I do," Roland said. "I knew for a long time. I even took the liberty of packing your suitcase." "How do you know?" she asked. "It does not matter. What matters is what I know," he said. He didn't tell her that Bill would be on the cruise to keep him informed of their activities. "Mike is coming here to pick me up this evening," she said. Roland shook his head. "I don't think so," he said. "In fact, if that bastard shows up here, I will kill both of you and make it look like self-defense. Better call him now and find another option." "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. Roland raised his gun. "Do you really want to test me?" he asked. Susan stepped back, shocked. "I don't think so. Call your lover. Now." He cocked the gun to emphasize his determination. Susan took out her phone and dialed a number. "Put it on speakerphone," Roland ordered. She complied, and soon they heard Mike answer the phone. "Hey, baby," he said. "Are you ready for me to pick you up?" No, honey," she said. "I'll come to you myself, and we'll go from there." "Oh, come on," he said. "We planned everything this way." "No, sweet," Roland snapped. "She will come to you, and I never want to see either of you again. If you set foot on my land, I swear to God I'll blow your brains out." "He means business," Susan said nervously. "Yes, I'm serious," Roland confirmed. Okay, Mike said. Calmly, "I'll stay here. Promise me you won't hurt her, Mike." "I won't hurt her if she leaves right now and you both never cross paths with me again," Roland said. He looked at his almost ex-wife. "Call me as soon as you get to his house, and call me as soon as you get to the airport. I will know where you are at all times." He turned to the phone again. "And if you betray me again, Van Owen, I swear I will not fail. Understood?" "Got it, Roland," he said. Roland took the phone from Susan and ended the call. He handed her the phone and pointed to the door. "Go away," he said to Susan. She stepped towards him and reached out to touch his face. Roland stepped back. "Don't touch me, bitch," he said. She recoiled from his words and tone of voice. "You have lost the right to touch me or kiss me. Just take your stuff and get out." She went to the suitcases and looked back at her husband. "Sorry, Roland," she said. "Yes, sorry," he said sarcastically. "By the way, you should know that when Van Owen is done with you, he will betray you just like he betrayed me. And believe me, he will not hesitate to kill you. I'm not saying he will, I just want you to know who you're dealing with, and know that I won't be there to pick up the pieces when he leaves you." Tears began to roll down her cheeks. "Do you not love me anymore?" she asked, crying. He shook his head. "No," he said. "I once loved. I even gave you a second chance, which is rare for me. But then you decided to betray me. I don't communicate with traitors, and that's exactly what you are. Now go away." She nodded and slowly walked out the door. Half an hour later, she called to say she was at Van Owen's condominium. Another half-hour later, she called to say that they were at the airport. "Goodbye, wife," he said. "Enjoy what's left of your worthless life." "What does it mean?" she asked. "You know the old saying about what happens when you lie down with dogs," he said. "Just remember what I told you." He ended the call and dialed Bill's number. "They're at the airport," he said when Bill answered. "Got them," Bill said. "I'll keep you posted." Over the next day or so, Roland received regular updates about Van Owen and his wife. They seemed to be having a great time on the cruise. On the second day of the cruise, Roland went to a local bar and listlessly watched the game on the big screen TV while sipping his drink. Several people, including the bartender, tried to start a conversation with him, but quickly abandoned the idea, realizing that he did not want company. An hour later, his phone rang. He looked and saw that it was Bill calling. He answered and spoke to his friend. "What's happened?" he asked. "Boss, your wife is in danger," Bill said. "Damn," Roland thought. "What's happening?" he asked. "Just as you predicted. I overheard Van Owen talking to some of the guerrillas," Bill said. "He takes her to the island, and I follow him on another boat. He's going to hand her over to them as a sex slave." "Do you know where they're going?" Roland asked. "Damn, boss," Bill said. "There are only 700 islands in the Bahamas, but Van Owen let it slip when he talked to the partisans." "When is the transfer planned?" Roland asked. "From what I heard, in 12 hours, Bill said. "You have just enough time to get here if you want to get her out." Roland hated what his wife had done, but couldn't live with himself if he let her end up in that situation, or worse, dead. There was no other choice. Van Owen had to die, and he will deal with Susan's betrayal later. "Send me the coordinates and arrange transportation," Roland said. "Already done, boss," Bill said. "The parts are on their way to you." Roland smiled. This was one of the qualities he appreciated in Bill. He was not only faithful, but also knew how to plan ahead. "Thank you, Bill," Roland said. "See you soon." "I'll be here," Bill said, ending the conversation. Roland put the phone away, paid the bill, and went home. Once there, he went up to the attic, where he stored his equipment. He opened a large chest and opened it. There it was, his Thompson rifle, covered in oil, waiting for his touch. He took it and examined it. Everything was still clean, oiled, and in good condition. He took a loaded drum and a large magazine. He decided that 130 rounds should be enough. If not, he was sure he would find another weapon if it came down to it. He grabbed the rest of his gear and dressed for work. When he finished, he headed to the small airstrip where a small Learjet was waiting for him. He talked to the pilot for a minute and gave him the coordinates that Bill had sent, along with an envelope of money. A few minutes later, the plane took off. Roland studied the map Bill had sent him and surveyed the area. Although the island was largely uninhabited, it did have an airstrip that was primarily used by smugglers and guerrillas. He studied the map carefully and imagined a plan of action. He went to the restroom, finished applying camouflage paint, and put on his gear. He looked at himself in the mirror before leaving and mentally prepared himself for the bloody work ahead. He double-checked his equipment and left the restroom. After some time, he looked into the darkness and saw an island below. Looking closer, he noticed that it was a fire. The plane began to descend and landed on a dirt strip. When the plane slowed down, he opened the door. The pilot walked up to the passenger compartment and looked at Roland. Roland looked back at him. "Wait for my signal," he told the pilot, who nodded in agreement. Roland got off the plane and saw Bill running towards him. "This way," Bill said, walking back. "It's impossible not to notice that Van Owen has built a good fire." "I saw it," Roland said quietly. "Fool, I saw him 20 miles away." They made their way quietly through the vegetation mainly so that the cartridges in the drum would not rattle too loudly, and within 10 minutes they were at the edge of the camp. Roland and Bill sat down and looked around the camp. Susan was tied to the ground, her arms and legs spread wide. In addition to Van Owen, Roland spotted 3 guerrillas. Susan cried and begged her to let her go. "Please, Mike," she cried. "Do not do that. Don't I mean anything to you?" He laughed. "Yes," he said. "You're worth about $250,000 to me now," he added, holding up a wad of cash. "When the boss arrives, we will exchange you for the second half of my fee, and you will go live your new life. And your stupid husband can't do anything about it." The 3 partisans laughed in response. One of them stood over Susan and began to unbutton her pants. "Take it away," Van Owen said. "El Capitan wants it fresh. You know it." The partisan, sighing displeased, buttoned up his pants. Roland looked at Bill, who was holding a .45 caliber pistol, then looked at his watch. It's time to act. He gave Bill a hand signal, and they began to move quietly. They approached the camp as Van Owen and the guerrillas gathered around the fire. Roland motioned for Bill to stay behind him and take cover. Bill obediently hid, and Roland slowly approached the camp. The four men heard Roland switch the weapon to full auto, which required turning two switches, one to release the safety and the other to set it to full auto. Without saying a word, he pulled back the bolt handle, and before the guerrillas could react, he fired several short bursts from his hip, sending the guerrillas to the ground. Several partisans managed to shoot, but missed. After the guerrillas were killed, Roland pressed his weapon to his shoulder and took aim. Before Van Owen could react, Roland fired 3 bullets at him. The whole operation took just a few seconds. Roland looked around to make sure everything was okay. At that moment, he noticed Susan. One of the partisans' shots hit her in the side. Bill leaned over her as Roland watched. She looked at Roland with sad eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Soon her eyes glazed over. Roland had seen enough death to know that she was dead. Bill checked his pulse and looked at Roland. "She's dead, boss," he said. "Are we going to take her?" Roland spat in her face. He thought for a moment, watching the drool running down her left eye, then shook his head. "No," said Roland. "El Capitan is waiting for a blonde to be brought to him. I think he should get what he paid for, don't you think?" "Damn, you're cold-blooded, boss," Bill said. Roland chuckled. "You know it, my old friend," he said. "Let's take her to the fire. She wanted to be with Van Owen. She could burn with him. Forever." They carried her body to the fire. Roland used wads of money to start the fire, passing 1 wad to Bill. "Consider it a bonus," he said, and Bill hid the money. They placed Susan's naked body on the growing fire, following Van Owen and the 3 dead guerrillas. "Help me collect the shell casings," Roland said. "There's no point in leaving too much evidence." After he and Bill collected the spent .45 caliber shell casings, they headed to the plane. The pilot was waiting for them and took off as soon as they entered the cabin. Bill watched his old friend as the plane returned to the States. Roland sat in the back seat, looking out the window, drinking beer and smoking an expensive cigar. Bill had seen this many times and knew better than to interfere at least until Roland had finished his first beer. "Mind if I join you?" Bill asked as Roland opened the second beer. Roland handed him a beer and a cigar, motioning for him to sit down. "We've been through a lot, haven't we?" asked Bill. Roland nodded, looking out the window. "You know, I'm really sorry about all this." "I know, Bill," Roland finally said. "I warned her. Damn it, I warned her this would happen. The stupid bitch just didn't listen." "So what do we do now?" asked Bill. "Are you thinking about getting back into business?" "No," said Roland. "I'm too old for this shit. Too sentimental." "Sentimental?" asked Bill. "You? Sentimental? This will be the day." Roland chuckled. "Yes," he said. "We'll have to put on a good show in the next few weeks, you know." "Yes," said Bill. "I know. Some people will want to know what happened." "But we don't know anything, right?" Roland asked. "Nothing at all," Bill said. "I'll also make sure the pilot stays quiet as well." Roland nodded. It's amazing how much silence money can buy, along with the threat of a bullet to the back of the head. After the plane landed, Roland gave the pilot another envelope of money, and Bill stayed behind to ensure the pilot's silence. Roland drove home, cleaned his equipment, and put it away, hoping to never have to use it again. Tired, he finally fell asleep in the bed he once shared with Susan. Roland continued to live, trying to forget about Susan as much as possible. When the ship reported that she was not on board, he filed a missing persons report and put on a performance for the police who questioned him. They accepted his story and left, wishing him luck. The company where Susan and Van Owen worked also questioned him about their absence. He managed to convince them and even make fun of them. Of course, they knew about her affair with Van Owen, right? He waited patiently, and a year after Susan went on the cruise, he filed for divorce over her disappearance. 60 days later, the divorce was finalized, and Roland became a free man again. Still resentful of her actions, Roland gave up on the idea of another serious affair with a woman. Everything was going fine for Roland until the week before Christmas, when he heard a knock on the door. He looked through the peephole and saw two men in dark suits and glasses. FBI, he thought. He opened the door, and one of them showed his ID. "Roland Waters?" asked the man. "Yes," Roland answered. "Special Agent Smith," he said. "This is Agent Jones, FBI. Can we come in and talk for a minute?" "Of course," Roland said, ushering them inside. They looked around the house as they entered. "Please sit down," Roland added. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Thank you, but that won't be necessary," Smith said, sitting down in Roland's favorite chair. "How can I help, gentlemen?" Roland asked. "Have you ever been to the Bahamas?" asked Smith. Roland shook his head. "No," he said. "Why are you asking?" "What about your wife?" asked Smith. "Ex-wife," Roland said. "She left me over a year ago with her lover, and I don't know where they went." "Was it Michael Van Owen?" asked Smith. "Yes," said Roland. "We received information from the Bahamian authorities who found their remains on one of their islands," Smith said. "They have been identified as your ex-wife and Mr. Van Owen." "Oh, really?" Roland asked. "Yes," Smith said. "You don't know anything about this, Mr. Waters?" Roland shook his head. "No," he said. "Nothing. Why are you asking?" "Just finishing up some things," Smith said. "We have been following Van Owen for a long time. Then he suddenly disappeared. It appears that he was involved in human trafficking while pretending to be an upstanding citizen. Apparently, he had a disagreement with one of his business partners." "Disagreement?" Roland asked. "What disagreements? And what does Susan have to do with this?" "You're welcome, Mr. Waters," Smith said. "Don't insult our intelligence. We know everything about you. You are known in certain circles for your Thompson gun, you know. Personally, I can't understand why anyone would want to wear such a noisy old artifact, but to each their own, I guess." "You don't think I had anything to do with what happened to Susan, do you?" Roland asked. "No," Smith said. "Your ex-wife was shot with a 9mm, not a .45. 4 more bodies were found, including Van Owen, and all appeared to have been shot with a .45. This is a fairly common caliber, and we're pretty sure it's not you." "Why?" Roland asked. "All the shell casings were collected, and none of the victims were decapitated," Smith said. "I see," Roland said. "We just wanted to make sure you didn't go back into business," Smith said. "You haven't returned, have you?" "No, I haven't," said Roland. "Too old to be trudging through the jungle again." Smith nodded. "Okay," he said, "because I would hate to arrest you." "Yeah, me too," Roland said. Smith and Jones stood up and shook Roland's hand. "That's all we have at this point," Smith said. "If you hear anything, call me," he added, handing Roland his business card. "Thanks, I'll do that," Roland said. Smith nodded. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Waters," he said as he walked out. Roland thought about calling Bill, but his friend beat him to it. "Hey, boss," Bill said. "I wanted to let you know." "I know," Roland said. "They just left." "They talked to me too," Bill said. "I didn't tell them anything. They said they were just finishing things up." "They told me the same thing," Roland said. "Hey, why don't we grab a beer?" Bill agreed, and they met that evening at a local bar. Their beer had just arrived when a song started playing on the jukebox. Roland was a warrior, from the land of the midnight sun, with a Thompson gun for rent. "We must fight." "Merry damn Christmas," Roland said as the song he hated started playing. "Merry damn Christmas, boss," Bill said, raising his beer. Roland looked around the bar, trying to see who played this song. 2 men in dark suits sat in one corner. One of them raised a beer in his direction with a wry grin. "Agent Smith." "Bastard." Roland smiled back, raising his middle finger with one hand while holding his beer with the other. Smith laughed and drank his beer. When Smith and Jones finished their beers, They walked over to Roland's table. "Well, well," said Smith. "The last two surviving members of Strike Force Charlie drink beer together. That's what you called yourself in those days, isn't it?" he asked. "Just two old friends drinking beer," Roland said. "There's nothing illegal about this, right? It's the Christmas season." "Of course not," Smith said. He pulled up a chair and sat down next to Roland. He pointed to a very attractive waitress in a short skirt. "You know, she's been eyeing you ever since you came in." "So what?" Roland asked. "Probably looking at this scar," he added, pointing to the scar on his face. "No, I don't think so," Smith said. "What do you say?" he asked, looking at Jones. Jones shook his head. "No, definitely not," Jones said. Smith turned back to Roland. "No, she has a crush on you," he said. "I'm a federal agent. I can determine this. Maybe if you play your cards right, you can get a piece of this night." Roland looked at him. "Everything is fine. We checked it. Her name is Maria. She is completely free, and she doesn't work for the Russians." Jones chuckled at this. Roland understood the reference. "You're really a comedian, aren't you? Maybe she works for you," Roland said. Smith shook his head. "No," he said. "Too beautiful. Trust me, she wants you. And best of all, you won't have to ask for lawyers, guns, or money if you contact her." He chuckled, standing up and patting Roland on the shoulder. "Keep fighting, Roland, and Merry damn Christmas." Roland laughed. "Merry damn Christmas to you too," he said. "You too, Jones." "Thank you," Jones said as he left the bar. Roland and Bill watched as the two agents left the bar. "Well," said Bill. "What do you think?" Roland shrugged. "Just two friends drinking beer," he said. His gaze shifted to the beautiful young waitress. As he watched, she smiled at him several times. "To answer your question, I think I'll still introduce myself to Maria." Bill laughed, finishing his beer. "You old dog," he said, standing up. "I'll go home while I can still walk. Good evening to you." "I will," said Roland. "Let's talk later." Bill left the bar, and Roland turned his attention back to Maria. "Merry damn Christmas to me," he said to no one in particular, gesturing for her to come over to his desk. Yes, he decided it would be a happy damn Christmas with her in his bed. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.